I know the truth about the hospital fire. Posted by Jacob Milke on Our No Sleep. There are things a person must live with. For most, living with their secrets is easy. For others, it's the hardest thing in the world. For those of us who have to live with the hard things, the things most people couldn't, there eventually comes a day when we must share what we know, for better or worse. The things I know, I can no longer keep to myself. I know I shouldn't share them. I know there are things that should never be brought into the light of day, but I don't have a choice. I need to tell my story as much as I need to breathe. Some people know a watered-down version of this story already. This version is technically true in the same way it's technically true that most people are just bags of water. The version known by most goes like this. On August the 11th, 1992, a fire broke out at Mary Chase Memorial Hospital in the town of Greenpoint, California. 23 people died in the fire. The hospital was demolished, and since then all residents of Greenpoint get their health care in neighboring towns and cities. This version of the truth is all most people want to know. As horrible as it is, it makes sense. It fits within the confines of the rules and laws that govern our world. It is part of the system. The version of the story I know, and I'm not fool enough to believe it's the whole truth either, doesn't fit in the world as we know it. It takes the human mind to the limit of its comprehension. I wish I was one of those people who stop at the official story. I don't blame people for not wanting to look further than that. Were I in their position, I wouldn't look further either, but I'm not as lucky as that. Something, maybe fate or maybe something much darker, singled me out for unique knowledge of the event. In the years since that day, I've come to refer to the hospital fire and the events leading up to it and the events that took place after as the maddening. A fitting name, I think, because for a brief time, the world itself went mad. It's hard to know exactly when the maddening started, but in my research, I've found potential signs of its approach for up to 3 years before it happened. Now, this is just guesswork on my part, but I believe the maddening was preceded by a series of omens. The earliest of these omens, as far as I can tell anyway, happened in the summer of 1989. A tornado left a path of destruction on the outskirts of town in a nearly perfect circle. 4 people died during the storm. I tracked down the locations where their bodies were found, and when I marked them on a map of town, I found that the placement of their bodies aligned perfectly with the directions. One was found north of town, one to the east, and so on. Could that be a coincidence? Perhaps, but I approached my investigation with the mindset that there are no coincidences, especially not in relation to the maddening. Between the time of the tornado and the maddening itself, Greenpoint saw a number of unusual phenomena. In the fall of 1989, a massive flock of birds descended on town. I've seen figures putting their numbers at anywhere from 30 million to 500 million. Multiple vehicle accidents were caused by them flying so low to the ground that cars would smash into hundreds of them as they drove. Winter of 1989, a group of 36 deer ran through town. They attacked multiple pets, killing some dogs, and damaged numerous vehicles and shop windows. Summer of 1990, a Ukrainian man who remains unidentified to this day is arrested by the Greenpoint Sheriff's Department after he vandalized a church. He smashed out a window in the night and started shoving roadkill through the opening. The church removed dozens of dead raccoons, possums, squirrels, dogs, cats, and groundhogs from the sanctuary. Spring of 1991, a sinkhole opens up on the main road. The water it filled with was the color of blood. Sometimes I wonder why the people of Greenpoint don't talk about these events more. Maybe they dismiss them as curiosities, or maybe nobody obsesses over that time period like I do. I'm sure most people want to forget about what happened in 1992. I think about it every single day. It's hard to know exactly when the maddening started, since I'm sure a great many strange incidents went unnoticed by the public eye. As near as I can tell, the first sign that something in our town was terribly wrong was a woman named Edna Popwell. She was a woman in her 60s who lived alone in a trailer park on the edge of town. After no one had seen her for weeks, Sheriff Nunes visited her trailer. She wouldn't answer the door, but Nunes heard her yelling gibberish and forced entry. Now, I've never seen the woman. When she was brought to the hospital that day, it was my day off. I was at home eating junk food and reading sappy romance novels, but I talked to some of my coworkers the next day. They said Edna was brought in strapped to a gurney. She was screaming at everyone near her and trying to attack them. From what they told me, and from what Sheriff Nunes later confirmed, Edna had been scourging herself with something. Her skin was whipped raw and she was bleeding from hundreds of lacerations. Edna's heart gave out an hour after she was brought in. Her death report states that she died of natural causes, with no mention of the harm she'd done to herself. Years later, when I spoke to a retired Sheriff Nunes, I learned something that no civilians in town knew. In the weeks before her death, Edna was stockpiling jars filled with her own bodily fluids and excrement. Her basement had shelves full of them. Nunes never found out why, nor why she attacked him after he entered her home. He still has the scars under his eyes from her attempting at clawing them out. Edna was the talk of the town for about 3 days, before everyone wrote her off as a senile old woman who snapped. She might have remained a source of entertainment for longer, as often is the case in small towns, but on the third night after her death, something even stranger happened. August the 5th, 1992, a week before the hospital fire, a naked woman was spotted walking through town. Her skin was filthy. There wasn't a single inch of her that wasn't smudged with dirt. Dried blood caked her feet. Her hair was tangled and uneven. There were bald patches where it appeared she tore clumps of it out. She also had a small bulge in her belly, which she kept rubbing. Her pregnancy was confirmed later at the hospital. The woman never spoke a word to anyone. She would grunt and cry and sometimes hiss at people, but she never spoke, nor did she engage in any other communication with police, doctors, or nurses. I was on duty when they brought her in. I didn't attend to her that first day, but I saw them wheeling her in. I remember thinking she looked like the saddest woman I'd ever seen. That was the night everything changed. I often think back on that day and wonder what would have happened if I hadn't forgotten my keys at the desk. Would I never have known the truth about all the horror to come? Would I have died in the fire like so many others? I have a great memory. Before that night, I'd never forgotten my keys, and I haven't forgotten them since. Why that night? Why at that one perfect moment? The only way it makes sense in my head is if some higher power, wanted it to happen. I realized in the hospital parking lot that I'd forgotten my keys. When I went back inside to get them, I saw Dr. Hannity shambling down the hall. His eyes were unfocused, erratic. There was something in his hand. He looked like a man unhinged. I'd never seen him that shaken up. I followed him. He didn't respond to me calling his name. We reached a broom closet and he slipped inside. Feeling afraid and slightly foolish, I went in after him. It was cramped. We stood only a foot apart from each other. He was shaking his head and a noise was coming from him, like he was trying to chuckle but only managing a wheeze. He gave me the thing in his hand. It was a vial of some thick black fluid. "It's her blood," he said. "The girl's blood is dead. She's dead too. She has no heartbeat." "Dr. Hannity?" He seized me by the shoulders and stared me in the eye. "We can't tell anyone. You hear me? We can't tell anyone. Not our colleagues, not our loved ones, no one. I heard it in my head, talking to me, telling me its will. It doesn't want us telling people. You understand? I didn't understand anything at all, but I nodded anyway. I was terrified of Dr. Hannity in the moment, and I would have agreed to anything he said. He nodded and started mumbling to himself. I left him in the broom closet, not sure what to do. The woman's room was on the way out. To this day, I don't know what compelled me to go in there. One moment I was on my way out, and the next I stood over the woman's bed while she slept. With how filthy she looked and how deeply she slept, it was easy to believe she was dead. I took a nearby stethoscope and put it on. I placed the end on her chest. The woman had no heartbeat. She opened her eyes and looked at me. If you're reading this, then by now one of two things must be going through your mind. The first and more likely of those things is that you think I'm delusional or lying. Perhaps living through such a traumatic experience warped my memories to the point where my mind made events something more than they are. Trust me, I've considered that many times, and I don't blame you for thinking the same thing. The second possibility, which is what I hope to accomplish by sharing this account, is that you are starting to realize how much deeper things go than the official story. Something happened while I was at the hospital having my world view thrown into chaos by a woman who should have been dead, yet still acted like she was alive. A fog rolled into town, the kind that made it so you couldn't see 10 feet in front of you. The fog didn't retreat from Greenpoint until after the hospital fire. One thing that was overlooked by newspapers in the area, and by most people in general, was the string of disappearances that occurred between August the 5th and August the 11th. It's understandable, of course. A hospital fire that kills 23 people is an enormous tragedy. It outshines all other events that happen around the same time. Who cares about a few missing people when sick children burn to death in their hospital beds? I confess that I didn't know about the disappearances back then. I only learned of them through my years of researching the maddening. The first person to go missing was a high school student named Trevor Ziegler. He snuck out of his parents' house to go to a party at a friend's. That friend, when questioned later by police, claimed Trevor never showed up. Somewhere between sneaking out of his bedroom window and the party on the other side of town, Trevor disappeared. His own parents didn't report him missing for 2 days because they were used to his delinquent behavior. Trevor vanished the same night the fog rolled in, the same night the living dead girl was admitted to our hospital. August 5th was the real start of it all, the first true day of the maddening. Edna Popwell was only a harbinger of what was to come, a warm-up before the real show. I shouldn't have been driving that night. What happened at the hospital rattled me in a way I'd never experienced before. I wasn't capable of forming coherent thoughts, much less navigating through the thickest fog I'd ever seen. I didn't consider that back then. My only purpose in life upon running out the hospital doors was to get as far away from the dead woman as possible. I threw myself into the car and drove out of the parking lot at a speed that would have been ill-advised on a clear day. I should have been moving through the fog at 10 or 15 miles per hour. Instead, I blasted through it. By some miracle, I avoided all other vehicles on the streets, but daredevil luck only carries you so far. Something smacked off the side of my bumper while I drove. I slammed on the brakes. Another thing one should never do in poor visibility conditions, and screeched to a halt in the middle of the street. I didn't see whatever I hit. I was moving too fast, and I was too wrapped up in my own frightened thoughts. It was hard to guess the size of my victim from the impact I felt. Maybe someone more experienced could do it, but I'd never hit anything with my car before. I looked out every window for a body on the road, but the fog was too thick. I couldn't see anything except for what was immediately around the car. I should have gotten out to at least see if I'd hit an animal or a person. I didn't get out. I put the car in gear and drove away, slower this time. I don't know what made me drive off like that. Was it simple fear, shock, or something more? Perhaps I felt some kind of intuition, the animal part of my brain warning me of danger. Knowing what I do now, it was probably a good thing I didn't get out of the car back then. I'm not making excuses for myself, by the way. I know what I did and how I responded was wrong. Sometimes I even wonder if I hit Trevor Ziegler on his way to the party. I doubt it, though. They never found Trevor's body. The house I was renting back then didn't have a garage, so I parked the car on the street. The first thing I noticed when stepping outside was the smell. The fog smelled like dead things, rotting meat and sulfur. After a moment's contemplation, I began to worry that the smell wasn't the fog at all, but my car. I checked the front, and while there was a large dent in the frame, there was no blood or hair or anything to indicate I'd hit something living. Sleep didn't come easily to me that night. After 45 minutes of restless tossing and turning, I gave up and went to the living room. I turned on the television to a random channel. I needed the white noise, anything to take my mind off the woman at the hospital. I was never a religious person, but for the first time in my life, I was considering the existence of the devil. What was happening at the hospital wasn't natural, and thus only a supernatural explanation was possible. I prayed that night, and I didn't feel the slightest bit ridiculous for doing so. My newfound faith didn't survive through the years. It didn't even survive that week. Not really. The things I saw during the maddening convinced me beyond a shadow of a doubt that there's no just or loving deity watching over us. If there was, it wouldn't have allowed those things to happen. I'm not totally an atheist, though. A part of me has suspected for a long time now that there is a God out there, and he's not on our side. No religion ever considered that, did they? What if God is malevolent? What if he hates us or simply pays no more mind to crushing us as a person would to crushing an ant? I've considered that maybe the thing I met at the end of the maddening was God. If it was, then there truly is no hope in the world. The telephone rang while I was in the living room. I think it was around 2 a.m. If not, it was at some time when callers wouldn't be expected because I was suspicious of the call. I thought maybe it was the police calling to inform me that someone witnessed my hit and run and they would be by shortly to arrest me. Now, you'll have to bear with me on this next part because my memory of that night is spotty. Everything else I remember with perfect clarity, but from the phone call to around noon that day, things are missing. I don't know that it was Dr. Hannity who called. "You're awake," he said. He sounded excited. "I knew you would be," it told me. "Doctor, it's really late and it's amazing." I hear its voice in my head. It tells me things. "Did you know Nurse Mackenzie and Dr. Davis are meeting in the basement every other night to copulate? Or that Perry is sneaking drugs from the pharmacy and selling them? It knows every sin we've committed. It tells me what our colleagues do in the dark to amuse me. It tells me jokes and stories and premonitions. It says I'm its herald in this world. We are connected." Doctor? I don't know what you're talking about. Now, it's really late and I'm going to hang up now. I tried to sound firm, but my voice shook. "Nurse," he whispered, "do you want to know a secret?" And that's where my memory stops for the night. I don't know what he told me. All I remember is him asking if I wanted to know a secret, and then waking up in my bed around noon. Well, that and one other thing. I don't remember what was discussed over the phone, but I do know this. At some point, Dr. Hannity stopped talking. From that point on, the conversation was between me and someone else. A third party I can't remember. It strikes me that most stories are not single stories in and of themselves. They're an amalgamation of stories, a collection of multiple accounts from multiple sources. Each one of those sources might see the story completely different from the rest. The Maddening is no exception. While I was offering my experiences, my own stories of dead women who won't stop moving and missing time brought on by a mysterious late-night callers, other people in Greenpoint were living their own stories. Sheriff Nunes had his own story, a mystery starring him as the detective at the center of the case. Trevor Ziegler lived his own story, which turned out to be a tragic tale. The story I want to bring to light today is that of Bethany Muse. When I was interviewing the residents of Greenpoint for my research, her story stuck with me the most. She experienced the maddening in a way most didn't. Interestingly, her personal horror story is self-contained. After all these years, she never put together that what happened to her might be related to the hospital fire. Kevin Muse, Bethany's husband, was a drinker. At night, he often went to a bar several blocks away from his house. On August 5th, the night the fog rolled in, he walked there at around 8 p.m. because his car was in the shop and he couldn't drive. Bethany watched him walk out the front door, and that was the last time anyone ever saw Kevin Muse. Like Trevor, his body was never recovered. Bethany liked to go to bed early so as to escape her husband's drunken ramblings when he returned home. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling or the walls, depending on which way she was facing, and thought about the nature of evil. Those were her exact words when I interviewed her, by the way. A shadow moving in the window caught her eye, and she abandoned her bed to investigate. She pulled the blinds up, but the fog outside was so thick there was no way to see anything. Any notions of sleep were hopelessly lost by that point, so Bethany went downstairs. She was feeling uneasy, so she locked the front door, which she usually kept open for Kevin. I want to point out here that everyone I interviewed experienced something similar during the maddening, even if that was the most they ever experienced. They all heard people and animals moving through their yards through the fog, or they heard noises coming from outside their homes. It seemed like for a week, everyone in Greenpoint at some point, though, thought there was a prowler or large animal on their property. But Bethany's story is the only one I've heard where the prowler actually tried to get inside the house. It started a little past 10 p.m. when Bethany heard footsteps on the roof. They were heavy footsteps, too heavy to belong to squirrels or raccoons. Bethany displayed extraordinary calm, more than I think I would have, and retrieved the pistol they kept in a safe in the bedroom. As soon as she was armed, she went around the house and made sure all the windows were locked. When she went to check on the attic window, she saw something looking in. It was too dark, and the prowler retreated too quickly for her to get a good look. But she was certain of one thing. The person or thing looking in through the window had a pair of horns. It was after this sighting that Bethany's composure started to crack. It wasn't only the impossible sight of horns on the intruder, but it was also the fact that there was no ledge of any kind outside the attic window. There was nothing for anyone to stand on. At this point, Bethany decided to call the police. On her way to the kitchen, where the phone was installed, she heard glass breaking upstairs. That sound was followed shortly by a crash and heavy footsteps moving downstairs. Fearing for her life, Bethany ran to the pantry and hid inside. She told me during our interview that it was a terrible place to hide, but she panicked. After stomping around the house for a spell, the intruder entered the kitchen. The shutters on the pantry door were spaced far enough apart to see through, and Bethany saw the intruder clearly for the first time. What she saw, what she swore to me on her grandchildren's lives she saw, was not human. It walked upright like a man, but its body was covered in white fur. Its feet were cloven hooves, and a tail hung from just above the creature's buttocks. The hands were more or less human in shape, only with long, twisted fingernails. The creature's head wasn't fully a goat's head, as it had no snout, but it was close. Its face sat on a long neck and horns protruded from the forehead. Its eyes had the horizontal slits of goat eyes. Since she could see it through the pantry door, it could also see her. When it turned to stare at her, she raised the gun and fired through the door. The bullet struck the creature in the chest, causing it to wail in pain and flee the house through the living room window. It's unclear what all happened after the creature fled. Bethany called the police, and Sheriff Nunes showed up at her house with half the force. No one believed her story, of course. They chalked it up to a woman being hysterical after a burglary. From what Bethany tells me, though, some of the creature's blood was on the floor. She said the police department collected samples of it, but no one told her anything about what the results of the DNA test were. When I interviewed Sheriff Nunes, he claimed the results got lost in the system. Bethany still lives in Greenpoint today. When it became clear she'd never see Kevin again, she remarried and had 3 children who went on to have children of their own. She's known locally to some as the Goat Lady because she's never once wavered from her account of that night. I believe Bethany's story is important because she was the first to realize what I wouldn't until later. The fog that rolled over our town wasn't empty. It brought something with it. Bethany was one of only 2 people who experienced a home invasion during the maddening. The other person was Frank Goodmont, a retired Navy sailor who lived in the same trailer park as Edna Popwell. Sometime during the night on August the 5th, his front door was bashed in. Police found it in splinters the next morning. There were no signs of a struggle in the trailer, but Frank wasn't there. He was the 3rd known person, at least of those I've accounted for, to disappear that night. Bethany's story, like so many others, went largely ignored in the wake of the hospital fire. But her story, along with many others, is a part of the tapestry that forms the larger narrative of the maddening. There are still so many things that even I don't understand, and I've spent the last 26 years trying to piece together the whole story. That concludes all of the information I have on August the 5th. The first night of the maddening. If the accounts of the many citizens of Greenpoint I interviewed over the years are anything to go by, the morning of August the 6th brought relief for the whole town. I believe it was the sunlight. It pierced through the fog, making it easier to see through and reducing the power it had to warp Greenpoint in the unknown. For all intents and purposes, August the 6th was just like any other morning in the country with a bit more fog. Of course, this perceived safety was only an illusion. Whatever came to haunt our town was less active during the day. That didn't mean it was gone. It wasn't only people who disappeared during the night. A farmer who lived near town was missing 2 of his cattle during the morning count. The number of outdoor cats and dogs who vanished during the maddening also seemed to be unusually high. It's difficult to tell for certain without hard data, which nobody was keeping track of back then, but the number of people I interviewed with missing pets seemed high to me. For the Greenpoint Sheriff's Department, the start of the day's work was ordinary enough. Deputy Bernhardt responded to a noise complaint. Barry Westerman had been yelling at the top of his lungs in his home for an hour, seemingly at nothing and no one in particular, since his wife already started her shift at the diner. Barry wouldn't answer their door when Deputy Barnhart knocked, but Barnhart figured a man yelling at the top of his lungs was enough to justify a forced entry. He found Barry in his study, furiously scribbling in a sketch pad. He was unresponsive to Barnhart's questions and appeared to not even know he was there. Deputy Barnhart brought Barry to the hospital, where he was confined to the psych ward. He spent the next week drawing in notebooks. Barry died of a stroke on August the 11th, 3 hours before the hospital fire. His body burned with the rest of the building, but he wasn't considered one of the 23 victims. Barry's notebooks were consumed in the fire, but his wife kept the sketch pad he had been drawing. In the morning, Deputy Barnhart answered the noise complaint. She showed it to me years later during her interview. It was filled with symbols, some I recognized, some I didn't. I knew some of the symbols were Egyptian hieroglyphs and Nordic runes. I took pictures of everything and posted them online. I asked for help deciphering the meaning behind them, and a number of people were helpful. In addition to Egyptian and Norse, there were symbols that appeared to be Sumerian. Nobody could tell what the message was, if any. Even translated, Barry's scribblings appeared to be gibberish. Apart from the noise complaint, there wasn't much for the sheriff's department to do, not counting the paperwork they had to process from Bethany Mew's home invasion. I woke around noon, as I've previously said. It was disorienting at first due to the missing chunk of my memory. I made a pot of coffee and spent a good long time at my kitchen table contemplating the previous night. No one had come calling over the hit and run, so that was one pressure off my mind, at least temporarily. I thought about going into the hospital. I wasn't scheduled to work that day, but I wanted to know what was happening with Dr. Hannity. I wanted to see if the dead woman was still moving. Most of all, I wanted to see what the other nurses made of the situation. I think it's natural for humans to want to share burdens with others. It's part of our social nature or tribalism. If the nurses at Mary Chase Memorial Hospital had an opinion about Dr. Hannity's behavior or the nature of the dead woman, maybe I could take comfort in knowing I wasn't alone. I didn't go to the hospital that day. I didn't even call to check on things. Instead, I stayed indoors and watched television and read romance novels. I shut my mind down and refused to think about the past 24 hours. At around 9:30 p.m., I heard it. It came from outside, a moaning wail that sounded far longer than the lung capacity of most people would allow. It was hard to tell if the sound came from an animal or a person. I did nothing on the first call, but when it sounded for a second time, this time closer than it had been before, I forced myself to go to the window. I lifted one of the blinds and looked out into the night. Fog obscured everything, but after giving my eyes a chance to focus, I could see the fog wasn't empty. Something was moving out there just beyond the effective reach of my eyes. It appeared to be walking upright, whatever it was. I tracked it with my eyes for several seconds, but it was soon out of sight. After several minutes of seeing and hearing nothing, I retreated back to my comforter and picked up my romance novel. I proceeded to read the same page 5 times. There were 3 knocks at the side door. They weren't gentle knocks either. They were the kind an angry husband makes when his wife locks him out of the house. I held my breath. There was silence. Then there wasn't. 3 more knocks thudded on the door, followed by 3 more moments later. I got up and went to the side door. There was no way in hell I was opening it, but I wanted to know if something broke through. The knocks continued, always repeating in a sequence of 3. After a few cycles of this, I worked up the courage to look through the peephole and see who or what was on the other side of the door. I approached and put my eye to the hole. The moment I did, something dark shifted in my vision and another cry rang out. This one wasn't a wail like the others, but a screech. At such a close distance, it pierced my eyes and made my head ring. I jumped back from the door and pressed my hands to my ears. The screech stopped seconds later, and that was it. There were no further knocks on the door for the rest of the night, nor any more ghastly cries. I went to bed later that night without further incident, save for my nightmares. I have limited information on what happened the second night of the maddening, since I spent the entire day and night locked away in my home. However, I did learn of another disappearance. This one was difficult to look into, since no one officially reported her missing. It was widely assumed by most that she left town of her own volition. I'm not convinced. Her name was Naomi McLaughlin, though most know her by Jewel, her professional name. When she was 18, she became a dancer at a strip club 20 miles outside of Greenpoint. She switched careers when she turned 20, having realized men would pay a lot more for services that were more hands-on. She made good money, to the tune of $7,000 a week. Sheriff Nunes turned a blind eye to her business. He reasoned that as long as no one was being hurt or trafficked, it wasn't worth bothering anyone about. Sheriff Noons had that attitude about everything. He didn't care if someone lit up a joint behind a dumpster or if they drove 10 miles faster than they should or paid for their love by the hour. I knew Naomi. Not well enough to consider her a close friend, but well enough to chat with her at the supermarket and go out of my way to visit her whenever she was at the hospital. She was a kind woman who always had a smile for you, so long as you didn't look down on her. One of the people I interviewed spent an hour with Naomi in the early afternoon of August the 6th, before it got dark. As far as I know, he was the last person to see her. August the 6th was the last of what I think of as the childhood of my life. August the 7th would be the day I shed all illusions in hope of a rational explanation to everything. It was when I accepted that my town was under the influence of malevolent supernatural forces. It would still be days before I understood there was a reason why I was so close to the core of events of the maddening. I was chosen to bear witness to the unholiest of days. Even now, as I write this, I can't help but think that sharing my story, the story of the maddening, is exactly what it wants. I debated for a time whether or not to include the nightmare I had the night of August the 6th. There's no way of knowing if what I saw had anything to do with the maddening or if it was entirely a product of my own imagination. I do know that I never had a dream with such coherence and clarity before, and I haven't had another since. Was it a vision of some sort? If it was, it wouldn't even crack the top 5 strangest things to happen to me during the maddening. I did try to find out if what I saw really happened or not, but I was unsuccessful. It's difficult to find real-world information when dreams are all one has to go on. My nightmare took place inside the Willard house, an abandoned manor that 3 generations of kids in Greenpoint speculated was haunted. I imagine every town has a house like that. There was a man sleeping in the Willard house. He was filthy and smelled of urine and stale tobacco. His clothes were degraded to the point where they barely held together around his body. Greenpoint may be small, but it has its share of homeless. I didn't recognize the man, but that meant little on its own. So many people used our hospital, it was impossible to know them all. While the man slept, the walls of the Willard house started to bleed. Blood oozed from seemingly nowhere and streamed down to the floor. It didn't behave like normal liquid, however. Once it hit the floor, the blood began to move in ways that should be impossible. After a time, I realized the blood was moving to a single point on the floor, 5 feet from the sleeping man. It gathered there and formed a mass that became more solid as more blood was added to it. It rose into the air and began to form the shape of a giant worm-like creature. It was thicker around than any snake. The end of it split open and revealed rows of teeth similar to a piranha's. I guess the sleeping man could feel the presence of something else in the room because he stirred and sat up, rubbing his eyes. The blood creature didn't give him time to comprehend what was happening, which I guess was a small mercy. It bit down on his head and severed it at the collarbone. Then it ate the rest of him, one piece at a time. When the entire body was consumed, the creature melted into a gelatinous red mass. I could see the parts of the homeless man through the mass's translucent skin. His head was more or less intact and his eyes were open. They looked directly at me. I woke from the nightmare at that point. For a long time I told myself it was just that, a nightmare. I hope it was, but I no longer believe it. It was earlier than I would normally rise, but I wasn't going back to bed. I didn't want to see more images like the ones I had, so I kept busy before my shift at the hospital started. I cleaned my house, wiping dust out of the corners that hadn't seen attention since I'd first moved in. There's a kind of courage that sets in when one finds himself stuck in a nightmarish situation for extended periods of time. Or maybe not courage, but familiarity at least. I spent days in a constant state of horror and fear. I'd faced real monsters, and yet, as frightened as I was, I felt calm. I guess the body can't keep up shock and adrenaline forever. When I pulled into the parking lot of the hospital later, I noticed a group of people standing around a barrel in the middle of the lot. Flames were pouring out of the mouth of the barrel, and the people around it were throwing things in. One woman cut off a 10-inch lock of hair and burned it. A man dropped in a bag of what appeared to be fingernail clippings, and another added a dead sparrow. I left my car and approached. "What are you doing?" One man looked at me and blinked rapidly. "Well, don't rightly know. We all woke up this morning, thought this sounded like a pretty good idea. Ain't that right, folks?" The others murmured their assent and went back to burning things. I went inside with the intention of reporting them. You can't burn things in a hospital parking lot after all, but security was already aware of it. The more people I saw and spoke to, the more I came to understand that everyone was in a kind of daze. It seemed like everyone was functioning, but only barely. I made multiple attempts to point out to my fellow nurses how absurd everyone was acting, but doing so only elicited blank stares. When night fell, the collective delirious state of everyone around me exploded into full-blown psychosis. People wandered the halls, talking to themselves, ignoring every attempt of mine to reach them. Some would scream at random intervals, and some looked to be in a constant state of terror. This was the main effect the maddening had on the people of Greenpoint, and the reason for its naming. I wasn't being entirely hyperbolic when I said the world went mad for a time. For most people, it took effect 2 days after the fog rolled in, though some seemed to be affected from day one, such as Dr. Hannity. Regardless of when it took hold, everyone became locked in a state of dissociation. It manifested differently in everyone, but one symptom was shared by all: amnesia. No one remembered being in their abnormal mental state once the maddening was over. Not one single person I interviewed even knew about it, in themselves or in others. Perhaps the amnesia was planned, because by the end of the day, on August 7th, the creatures who came with the fog stopped trying so hard to hide themselves. I saw one of the monsters for the first time toward the end of my shift. It looked like a 10-year-old child who had been skinned alive. It wandered through the hospital halls, exposed muscles glistening wetly, wielding a perpetual grin. No one else could see it, or if they did, their madness made them ignore it. The creature would occasionally stop and poke a patient, making them jump and flinch. When it noticed me staring at it, it gave a little wave and went on its way. Since I didn't trust my coworkers to do a good job with their addled minds, I did my best to attend to as many patients as possible. Not that the patients appreciated it, or even noticed I was there. Right before I left, I decided to check on the one patient I'd been avoiding. When I entered the room, Dr. Hannity was sleeping on the floor at the foot of her bed. The dead woman wasn't, though. She rolled over to look at me standing in the doorway. She had worsened since I last saw her. Splotches of her skin were becoming discolored, and there was a foul smell hanging in the air. Her rotten black blood oozed out of her lower orifices and soaked the sheets. Her belly appeared to be slightly bigger than it was when she first came in. I brought in fresh sheets and a clean gown for her. It was foul work, and I nearly vomited multiple times, but I washed the blood from her legs, buttocks, and genitals. Maybe it was my imagination, but when she lay back down, I swear her eyes were conveying gratitude. Or maybe they conveyed nothing at all, because she was already dead, and I was projecting what I wanted to see. I thought a lot about that night, about my relationship with the dead woman, and I sometimes think maybe I didn't escape being affected by the maddening after all. Maybe the tender protective feelings I started to develop for her were as intentional as everyone else's amnesia. To this day, my heart still hurts when I think about the dead woman, my last patient. I don't think it matters if my feelings were forced upon me by a will greater than my own. I still consider her to be just as much a victim of the maddening as the rest of us. She wasn't like the rest of the monsters who came with the fog. Something terrible happened and was done to her, and she bore that hell until the very end. None of it was her fault. I washed her and looked after her for the rest of the week. Dr. Hannity disapproved of my attentions, claiming that she needed to be as impure as possible, but he didn't try to stop me. Maybe that was why he died in the end, and I didn't. Maybe he should have been more mindful of her. The maddening was in full force. The fog had descended and collective insanity had invaded our town. Monsters walked the streets. The real evil had yet to arrive, but it was coming, and when it got there, the world would weep tears of blood. Between August 7th and August 11th, a kind of nightmarish routine settled over Greenpoint. During the day, the people would do their jobs and feed themselves, but they did it automatically. When they weren't doing the bare minimum to keep themselves alive, they were lost in their own minds. There were a lot of fires then. Bonfires in the backyards, burning barrels in the streets, even small campfires made by the children. Everyone burned some garbage, excrement, food, possessions. I came to understand that they were making offerings to something. As far as I can tell, 7 more people disappeared in the days leading up to the end of the maddening. None of their bodies were ever found. There were other curious events that took place around town in that time as well. Hundreds of cats, both domestic and feral, made their way to the cattle farm on the outskirts of town. There, they consumed one of the cows down to the bone. I interviewed the veterinarian who examined the remains, and he was of the opinion that the cow offered no resistance as it was eaten alive. A fully grown American alligator was found in the pool at the local YMCA. No one has any idea how it got there. It was removed after the hospital fire and donated to a local zoo where it lived until its death in 1999. Approximately 9 months after the maddening, 11 women from Greenpoint all gave birth on the same day. 3 of those women had twins. A young man who was walking from coast to coast across America for charity happened upon our town on August the 9th. He spent 3 days in Greenpoint sleeping in a tent in our public park. He later claimed he had no memories of those 3 days and became something of a minor celebrity amongst the UFO watching and alien abduction crowd who believed he was abducted from Greenpoint. I would call their theory ridiculous, but who am I to say that after the things I've seen? In the early morning hours of August 11th, a storm moved in. It covered the entirety of Greenpoint, blocking most of the light and turning the final day of the maddening into perpetual night. It didn't rain until close to midnight, but lightning flashed and thunder boomed the entire day. 3 people were struck by lightning that day. 2 men, Jeff Glover and Marty Knapp, and a woman, Claire Cunningham. Jeff and Claire survived. Marty did not. Claire told me that right before lightning struck her, she saw a face in the clouds, twisted and smiling. At approximately 11 p.m., lightning caused a power outage for the entire town. The hospital had a generator to keep the life support machines on, but the lights were dim. We had to work in the dark. I'd been taking care of the dead woman every day since August the 7th. I helped her to the bathroom and changed her clothes and sheets. I made her eat and drink, which she never wanted to. I washed as much of her skin as I dared and stopped altogether on August the 10th when a piece of her flesh wiped away with a sponge. As much as I wanted to care for her, there was no stopping the decay. More of her skin blackened and peeled away each day. By the time August the 11th came around, her eyes had retreated into her skull. There was no mistaking that she was a corpse. Still, I cared for her, and I think she appreciated it. Most worrisome of all was her pregnancy. Her belly swelled unnaturally fast and to unnaturally large proportions. If it had been a normal pregnancy, I would have guessed she was having quadruplets from the size of her belly. Even back then, I knew that pregnancy was the reason for it all. Whatever was inside that poor woman was the source of the maddening. The people in town had lost their minds because of it. The monsters in the fog were gathering around it, whatever it was. I think it was intelligent even in the womb. Sometimes I'd put my hand on the woman's belly and I'd feel a small hand press back from the other side. When the power went out, the woman became agitated. She squirmed in her bed and made mewling noises. Those squirms turned into thrashes and the mews became screams. Dr. Hannity was drawn to the room by her screams. "She's going into labor," he said excitedly. Dozens of soft pattering sounds came from the window. The storm finally opened and released its rain. Only the raindrops were red. Of course it was raining blood. Why wouldn't it? I walked over to the window and looked out. The blood rain was making the fog dissipate, and I could see a multitude of shadowy figures standing in the parking lot. Some were more or less human in shape, others were not. When I turned back around, I saw the skinless child that had been roaming the hospital watching us from the doorway. The dead woman screamed her loudest yet, and I spoke to Dr. Hannity. "She needs an emergency C-section," he scoffed. "Our Lord doesn't need help being born." There wasn't enough time to do anything anyway. The woman's legs pulled apart, seemingly of their own accord, and she started to tear in half. Stinking black blood gushed out, falling to the floor and covering everything. Blood wasn't the only thing that fell out. I hadn't expected the shivering thing on the floor to be a normal baby, but it wasn't a monster either. Curled up into the fetal position at my feet was what happened to be a young woman, small in proportion, yet appeared to have already gone through puberty. She was hairless and her eyes were squeezed shut. She clutched at her arms as if in pain and trembled like she was naked in the snow. I've replayed what happened next thousands of times in my head. I think about it every night before I go to bed and every morning while I'm getting ready for the day. I don't know why I did it. What I did, it wasn't a conscious choice on my part. It was something I did without thinking, without hesitation. It was instinct. It was like I was born to be in that place at that time. Like my entire life had been leading up to that moment, and when the moment finally came, it just happened. I picked the girl up and held her in my arms with a strength I never had before. The dead woman who gave birth to her emitted one final scream and burst into flames. Fire shot from her eye sockets and mouth, erupting from her skin and pouring out of her open womb. It moved quickly, climbing up the walls and spreading across the ceiling. Tongues of the flame licked at Dr. Hannity, and soon he was ablaze too. He didn't scream, though. He laughed. He laughed until his vocal cords burned away. The skinless child fled from the room, and I don't think it was because of the fire. I carried the girl out of the room and down the hall. No one tried to stop us, but when I went to turn the corner, I came face to face with a monster. It was comprised of 3 human heads, 2 male and a female, one in the middle, which rested on a disc-shaped body with 7 arms. It swiped at me with one of those arms, and its claws tore through my side. I did feel the pain, but for some reason, it didn't faze me. I stepped around the creature, and it let me pass. The hospital was in full evacuation mode by the time we reached the parking lot. Patients, doctors, and nurses alike rushed through the doors to escape the blaze. The top floors were already engulfed in flames. None of the people in the parking lot were aware of the numerous creatures around them, and they didn't seem to notice the blood raining down on them. The monsters gave me a wide berth while I carried the dead woman's daughter to the car. The shock and blood loss from the wound in my side finally started to get me on the drive home. I don't know how we made it there safely, but when I pulled into my driveway, my vision was starting to go black. The storm stopped dumping blood and had switched to regular water. I tried to make it to a bed or bathroom once inside, but it was useless. I dropped the girl on the floor and moments later collapsed myself. The last thing I saw before slipping into unconsciousness is the girl uncurling herself from the fetal position and standing up. I woke up in my bathtub in a series of stages leading from unconsciousness to grogginess to fully awake. The first thing I noticed was the water. I was naked and half submerged in hot water. The gaping wound in my side still throbbed with agony, but it wasn't bleeding anymore, and then I became aware of the person next to me. She had one hand on my back, making sure I didn't fall back into the water. The other hand held a sponge and was gently wiping away the filth still crusted to my skin. The girl looked different when she wasn't covered in her mother's rancid blood. She had the pale skin of someone who'd never spent a day in the sun. In fact, almost everything about her was white. Her hair, which was no more than a short layer of fuzz on her head, was platinum white. It was the same for her eyebrows, armpit hair, and pubic hair. Her nipples were almost invisible on her breasts, and even her fingernails and toenails were unnaturally devoid of color. She was like a rendering of a person someone forgot to color in, except for her irises. Her irises glowed red, the only color on her body. She noticed me staring and smiled. "Sorry, I washed off first. I hope you don't mind. I know it's your house, but I figured it's my birthday, so..." I turned toward her and pain lanced through my side. She chuckled when I winced. "Yeah, sorry about that. Abby's shy, and you startled her when you turned the corner. Here, let me help you with that." She plunged her hand into my open wound and pulled it out again. The entire motion was so fast, I only had time to let out a startled yelp before it was over. I should have been in unimaginable pain, but instead there was only a sharp stinging and itching in my side. I looked at it and saw the skin and muscle fibers knitting themselves back together. In a few more moments, the wound was closed completely. A few moments more, and only a scar remained. The girl smelled her fingers. "It's a good thing I took care of that. You were developing a staph infection." She continued to bathe me while I processed everything that had happened. My entire world had changed in the span of a week. Everyone I'd known my whole life went insane. My last patient was a dead woman who refused to be still. A fire had ravaged my place of employment. I didn't know yet how many people perished in the blaze, but I knew in my heart the hospital was gone and would never reopen. Monsters were real. Evil was real. All of it seemed to center around the girl washing me. A girl who should have been a newborn, who ripped her way out of her dead mother hours ago and healed my wound. Was she a goddess? A demon? Something that human minds couldn't conceive of? I didn't know, but I wanted to, so I asked, "What are you?" What a strange question. I'm a mammal, a female of the species Homo sapiens. I'm human, just like, well, maybe not like you. But cut me open and you'll find blood and bone and organs, a nervous system, a stomach. Everything that makes you also makes me. "And what are you when you're not human?" She smiled, showing small white teeth. "I'm whatever I want to be." While she was finishing washing me, I showed her to the bedroom and we dressed ourselves. She wore clothes my ex had left behind, boxers and tiger stripes, and a blue shirt with the image of a fish holding a heart in its fin and the words, "Hooked on you." She looked around the room, going through my things like they were the most fascinating trinkets in the world. She took a framed picture from my nightstand of a man in a fishing hat and vest and showed it to me. "Who is this man?" "That's my grandpa Levi. He helped raise me after my parents got divorced." "Levi?" The girl's eyes sparkled. "How interesting. Levi. I really like that name." We went downstairs, and I made food for my guest. Scrambled eggs and toast with a glass of milk at first. Then, when I ran out of eggs and bread, I made spaghetti. When she finished that too, I resorted to ramen noodles. The girl ate it all. Pounds and pounds of food. She finished off the gallon of milk in my fridge. "Do you want me to order a pizza or something?" I asked when she finished eating the last of my food. "No, I'm good. I'll pick up some lunch later." She belched and wiped her mouth. "I want to thank you. You took good care of Mother this past week, and you risked your life to save me. Not that I was in danger, of course, but you didn't know that. I want to give you something in return." She stood from her table and walked over to me, putting her hands on either side of my face and kissing my forehead. Where her lips touched, my skin began to burn. It hurt, but I stayed still and silent until she broke contact. "This is my promise to you. Nothing that belongs to evil will ever harm you. Demons and monsters will see you and know to stay away. Rapists and murderers will forget about you the moment they consider hurting you. When you die, no hell dimension will accept your soul. You will lead a long existence of safety and peace. I swear to it." She left my house shortly after eating. I never saw her again, at least not in real life. Sometimes I see her in my dreams. She never speaks to me in these dreams, but she usually does wink at me. The maddening ended more quickly than it started. The fog disappeared during the rains and didn't return. The blood that fell from the sky was swept out when the rain switched back to water, although I've often thought the town was far too clean the next day, even with the rain to wash the blood away. The monsters vanished, and people regained their sanity sans most of their memories of the time. The hospital fire was all anyone could talk about for months. The local news had at least one segment on it a day. They'd interview family members of the victims, speculate on how the fire started. The general consensus was a lightning strike, or how it spread so quickly. I thought a lot about fire during this time, and not just about the hospital fire. I thought about the hundreds of smaller fires set by people burning their possessions or bodily waste or animals. They were making offerings, presumably to the daughter of the dead woman. Was that what the hospital fire was? One last giant offering for the newborn? The dead woman had burst into flames for seemingly no reason at all. Maybe the monster that looked like a skinless child caused it to happen. It was in the room after all. Or maybe it was something greater than that. Maybe the universe itself was announcing the birth of that girl. I left town the summer of 1993. The others had amnesia to help them recover and move on, but I remembered everything. It was too much. I was never going to have a normal life if I didn't leave. I never fully recovered from the events of the maddening, never went back to being the old me. I've spent more than 20 years collecting all the information I could about that week. I've tried to understand it, to figure out the meaning behind it all, because there has to be a meaning, right? Such evil can exist for no reason. Horrible things don't just happen. There has to be a greater purpose, a reason. Call it fate or destiny or whatever. I know it has to do with that kid, but it's been 26 years and she hasn't done anything. The world didn't end. She didn't enslave humanity. Everything just kept on as usual. So what was the reason? Why did all those people have to die? I want to know. I really do. Someone out there has to know. Why does evil exist? Someone tell me. Please?